Admiral Zyxthera had commanded the Third Galactic Fleet for over 2 centuries, witnessing the rise and fall of a dozen civilizations. Her crystalline carapace bore the scars of countless battles, each mark telling a story of conquest and glory. Standing 7 feet tall with 4 arms that moved with practiced precision, she represented the pinnacle of Vorthan military evolution. The bridge of her flagship, the Eternal Dominion, hummed with the quiet efficiency that had made the Vorthan Empire the undisputed rulers of this galaxy. Today felt different, though. Today, she would witness something that would shatter everything she thought she knew about warfare, strategy, and the nature of conflict itself. The holographic display before her showed a small blue-green planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. Earth, the humans called it. Such a primitive name for such a primitive species. The intelligence reports were almost insulting in their simplicity. These creatures had barely achieved faster-than-light travel, their weapons were crude projectile-based systems, and their military tactics seemed to revolve around throwing bodies at problems until they went away. Admiral, her tactical officer, Commander Veltar, approached with the characteristic clicking sound that indicated nervousness among his species. The human delegation has arrived as scheduled. They're requesting permission to board. Zyxthera's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among her kind. Requesting? How quaint. Do they not understand they are already defeated? Their entire species exists at our sufferance. The war had lasted exactly 47 minutes. That was how long it took the Third Fleet to disable every major human military installation, communication satellite, and defensive platform. Not destroyed, mind you. The Vorthans prided themselves on their precision. Why waste resources when you could simply demonstrate overwhelming superiority? The humans had attempted to fight back, of course. Their primitive nuclear weapons had bounced harmlessly off Vorthan shields, their kinetic projectiles had been swatted aside like insects, and their so-called advanced aircraft had been disabled by simple electromagnetic pulses. It was almost embarrassing how easily they had fallen. Send them up, Zyxthera commanded. Let us conclude this farce quickly. I have 3 other systems to subjugate before the cycle ends. The human delegation consisted of 5 individuals, and Zyxthera had to suppress another amused click. They were so small, so fragile-looking. The tallest among them barely reached her shoulder, and their soft, pink skin looked as though it might tear if touched too roughly. They wore simple dark clothing that seemed more ceremonial than practical, and their faces bore expressions that she had learned to recognize as grim determination among lesser species. The one who stepped forward appeared to be their leader, a male with graying hair at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of significant age for their short-lived species. He carried himself with a bearing that reminded Zyxthera somewhat of military posture, though laughably inferior to Vorthan standards. Admiral, the human began, his voice carrying through the universal translator with surprising steadiness, I am General Marcus Chen, representing the United Earth Defense Council. We've come to discuss terms. Terms? Zyxthera found herself genuinely puzzled. Human, your species has been defeated. Your military has been neutralized, your governments have fallen, and your people cower in their cities awaiting our judgment. What terms could you possibly believe you are in a position to discuss? General Chen's expression didn't change, which she found mildly interesting. Most species showed clear signs of fear or desperation at this point. We're here to discuss the terms of your withdrawal from our system. The bridge fell silent except for the humming of the ship's systems. Zyxthera's tactical staff exchanged looks that ranged from confusion to outright disbelief. Commander Veltar's antennae twitched in a pattern that indicated he thought the humans might be suffering from some form of mental breakdown. Withdrawal? Zyxthera's voice carried a dangerous edge that had preceded the destruction of entire civilizations. Human, I think your primitive communication device is malfunctioning. You are here to surrender. To beg for the continued existence of your species. To accept whatever mercy we deign to grant you. No, Chen replied simply. We're not. The silence stretched longer this time. Zyxthera had encountered defiance before, usually in the final moments before a species' extinction. But this felt different. There was no desperation in the human's voice, no trembling in his stance. If anything, he seemed almost patient. Explain, she commanded. You've made a fundamental error in your assessment, Chen continued, his tone remaining conversational despite the circumstances. You believe you've defeated humanity because you've neutralized our military assets. You think you understand war because you've won every battle you've ever fought. But, Admiral, you've never fought a war. You've only ever fought other militaries. Semantics, ZYX Thera dismissed, though something about the human's certainty was beginning to disturb her. War is the contest between militaries. I have defeated your military. Therefore, I have won the war. War, Chen said, and, for the first time, ZYX Thera caught something in his voice that sent an unfamiliar chill through her crystalline nervous system, is what happens when you attack something that won't accept defeat. You haven't fought humanity, Admiral. You fought our armies, our navies, our air forces. You fought our governments and our institutions. He paused, and, when he continued, his words carried a weight that seemed to fill the bridge. You have never fought our people. Your people are civilians, Commander Veltar interjected, his clicking growing more rapid. Non-combatants. They are irrelevant to military conflict. The female human standing behind Chen made a sound that took a moment for the translator to process. Laughter, ZYX Thera realized, but not the kind that indicated joy. It was the sound a predator might make when it realized its prey had walked willingly into its den. Ma'am, the female said, addressing ZYX Thera directly, permit me to introduce myself. Colonel Sarah Martinez, formerly of the United States Army Special Operations Command. Before that, I was a civilian. A school teacher, actually. Taught 8th grade history in Detroit. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. Would you like to know what I taught my students about the nature of warfare? ZYX Thera found herself genuinely curious despite her growing unease. Enlighten me. I taught them that professional armies fight until they lose or until they're ordered to stop. But people fight until they win or until they die. And, sometimes, even death doesn't stop them. Impossible, Veltar clicked. Civilians lack training, equipment, organization. They are no threat to a disciplined military force. You're absolutely right, Chen agreed. A civilian with no training, no equipment, and no organization is no threat to a professional soldier. But, Admiral, you haven't left us with civilians. You've created something much more dangerous. And, what is that? Humans with nothing left to lose. ZYX Thera's tactical displays began chiming softly, indicating incoming reports from the occupation forces planetside. She gestured for her communications officer to route the reports to her personal display, expecting the usual confirmations of successful pacification operations. What she saw instead made her primary heart skip a beat. The first report was from the occupation force in what humans called North America. 17 Vorthan soldiers had been found dead in what had been classified as a secured area. Not killed by weapons, the report noted with obvious confusion, but by what appeared to be improvised explosive devices constructed from agricultural fertilizer and automotive fuel. The second report detailed similar incidents across every continent. Occupation forces were being attacked not by soldiers, but by individuals with no apparent military training. A human female who had identified herself as a baker had somehow managed to poison an entire Vorthan supply depot. A group of human children had led a patrol into what the humans called a booby trap that had resulted in the loss of 2 hover tanks. The third report made ZYX Thera's mandibles click involuntarily. In the human city called Stalingrad, a group of elderly humans had barricaded themselves in what they called a community center and were broadcasting messages across the planet's communication networks. The messages, according to the translation software, consisted primarily of instructions for creating weapons from common household items and tactical advice for fighting against superior forces. This is madness, she whispered, more to herself than to the humans. No, Chen corrected, having somehow heard her. This is humanity. Admiral, your species has mastered the art of military conquest. You've perfected the science of defeating armies and toppling governments. But you've never encountered anything like us. You are insects, ZYX Thera snarled, though even she could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. We will crush you utterly. You can't crush us, the third human, an elderly male with white hair, spoke for the first time. His voice carried the weight of age and, disturbingly, absolute certainty. We're not a military force you can defeat. We're not a government you can topple. We're an idea that won't die. What idea? Freedom, the old man said simply. The idea that we have the right to exist as we choose, to live as we see fit, to determine our own destiny. You can kill our leaders, destroy our cities, enslave our people. But, as long as one human draws breath and remembers what freedom feels like, this war will continue. More reports were streaming in now, and each one painted the same picture. Across the planet, humans were emerging from their homes not to surrender, but to fight. They weren't fighting as soldiers, weren't following military doctrine or strategic planning. They were fighting as ordinary people who had been pushed beyond the breaking point. A group of humans who called themselves farmers had somehow managed to capture and reverse-engineer Vorthan communication equipment, using it to coordinate resistance activities across entire continents. Factory workers had turned their manufacturing facilities into weapons production centers, creating devices that the Vorthan military couldn't even identify, let alone defend against. Children were serving as couriers and scouts, moving through areas that Vorthan forces considered secure. "This is chaos," Veltar clicked frantically. "This is not warfare. This is humanity," Chen repeated. "Admiral, your people fight wars between armies. You have rules, doctrine, strategy. You fight until one side surrenders or is destroyed, and then, it's over. You've never fought a people who refuse to accept that losing is even possible." ZYX Thera stared at the cascade of reports flooding her display. In the span of a single conversation, her secured occupation had transformed into a nightmare of unpredictable violence and impossible resistance. Her forces were reporting attacks from every direction by enemies who appeared to be everyone and no one. "What do you want?" she asked, and was disturbed to hear the uncertainty in her own voice. "Simple," Chan replied. "Leave. Take your ships, take your soldiers, and never come back. Do that, and this ends here. Stay, and discover what happens when you try to chain a species that would rather die than kneel. You cannot threaten me with the actions of untrained civilians," ZYX Thera protested, though even she could hear how hollow the words sounded. "I'm not threatening you," Chen said quietly. "I'm warning you. Because, Admiral, what you're seeing now, these scattered attacks, these improvised weapons, these unorganized acts of resistance, this is just the beginning. This is humans who are scared, angry, and desperate, fighting with whatever they can find." He paused, and, when he continued, his words carried a weight that seemed to settle over the bridge like a physical presence. "You haven't seen what happens when we get organized." The tactical display chimed again, this time with an urgent priority alert. The communication from the planetary surface was marked as coming from multiple sources simultaneously, suggesting some form of coordinated broadcast network that shouldn't have been possible given the destruction of human infrastructure. The message was simple, delivered in hundreds of languages and transmitted on every frequency the monitoring stations could detect: "People of Earth, this is our home. They are invaders. Fight." ZYX Thera watched as the message repeated, broadcast from sources her forces couldn't locate, reaching every corner of the planet simultaneously. More disturbing was what followed the message: detailed instructions for resistance operations, lists of improvised weapons and tactics, and, most unnervingly, what appeared to be complete intelligence reports on Vorthan military capabilities and weaknesses. "How?" she whispered. "You destroyed our governments." The fourth human, a younger female with intelligent eyes, spoke for the first time. "You eliminated our military command structure. You neutralized our official communication networks. But you left our people intact, and you underestimated what our people could accomplish when they were no longer constrained by regulations, command structures, or rules of engagement. You left us free," Chen added, and there was something terrifying in the simple way he said it. "Free from military doctrine that requires us to minimize civilian casualties. Free from international law that restricts what weapons we can use. Free from government oversight that limits how we can respond to threats." He looked directly into ZYX Thera's compound eyes. "Admiral, you've just discovered the difference between fighting humanity's military and fighting humanity itself." The bridge systems erupted in alarms as reports flooded in from across the fleet. The humans hadn't just been organizing planetary resistance, they had somehow infiltrated multiple ships in the occupation force. Vorthan soldiers were reporting equipment failures, computer viruses, and sabotage operations carried out by humans who had supposedly been processed as harmless maintenance workers and food service personnel. ZYX Thera stared at the chaos spreading across her displays, feeling something she had never experienced in 2 centuries of military command: the cold grip of genuine fear. Not fear of death, which she had faced countless times, but fear of the unknown. Fear of fighting an enemy that didn't follow the rules she understood. "What have you done?" she asked. "Nothing yet," Chen replied. "But, Admiral, every moment you remain in our system, every hour your forces stay on our planet, humans are learning. We're studying your technology, analyzing your tactics, understanding your weaknesses. We're sharing that information in ways you can't track or stop. And, most importantly, we're remembering." "Remembering what?" "What freedom tastes like," the old man said softly. "And how much we're willing to sacrifice to keep it." The tactical display showed Vorthan forces across the planet reporting the same phenomenon: organized resistance operations that seemed to spring from nowhere, coordinated attacks carried out by individuals with no apparent connection to each other, and a growing network of communication and supply that operated completely outside anything resembling conventional military structure. ZYX Thera realized, with dawning horror, that she was watching the birth of something entirely new. Not a military uprising or a government rebellion, but the spontaneous transformation of an entire species into something she had no experience fighting. An entire people who had chosen war. The secure conference room aboard the Eternal Dominion had been designed to withstand direct bombardment from capital-class weapons. Its reinforced walls and multiple layers of shielding made it the safest place on the ship for discussing sensitive matters. Today, however, Admiral ZYX Thera felt anything but safe as she studied the reports that continued to stream in from the planetary surface. 72 hours had passed since her conversation with the human delegation, and what had begun as scattered acts of resistance had evolved into something that defied every principle of warfare she had learned in her centuries of military service. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were rewriting the rules of conflict in ways that made her traditional strategic thinking utterly useless. "Report," she commanded as her senior staff filed into the room. The clicking of their mandibles and the nervous twitching of their antennae told her everything she needed to know about the situation before anyone spoke. Commander Veltar stepped forward, his usually pristine uniform bearing scorch marks from what appeared to be a recent explosion. "Admiral, I must formally request permission to implement Protocol 7 against the human population." ZYX Thera's compound eyes narrowed. Protocol 7 was the complete extermination of a planetary population, reserved only for species that posed existential threats to the Empire. "Explain the tactical situation." "The situation is..." Veltar paused, his translator struggling to find appropriate terms. "The situation is impossible, Admiral. Our forces control every major city, every strategic resource, every military installation. By every conventional measure, we have achieved total victory. Yet our casualties continue to mount, our equipment continues to fail, and our operational capabilities degrade with each passing hour." Major Kexboth, the fleet's intelligence officer, stepped forward with a data pad clutched in all four of her hands. "Admiral, we've identified the source of the coordination we're observing. The humans have created what they call a mesh network using their civilian communication devices. Every personal communicator, entertainment system, and household appliance has been converted into a relay node." "Impossible," ZYX Thera declared. "We destroyed their communication infrastructure." "We destroyed their official infrastructure," Kexboth corrected nervously. "But these humans have turned every electronic device on their planet into a communication tool. They're sharing information, coordinating operations, and distributing intelligence through a network that exists in the spaces between what we consider to be their actual communication systems." Colonel Trazek, the ground forces commander, was visibly agitated as he added his own report. "Admiral, they're not fighting like any species we've encountered. Yesterday, a patrol was attacked by what our analysis identified as a children's soccer team. The attack was coordinated with precision that would impress our own tactical specialists, using weapons improvised from sporting equipment and agricultural chemicals." "Children?" ZYX Thera's mandibles clicked in disbelief. "Ages ranging from 8 to 15 standard years, according to our biological scans," Trazek confirmed. "They disabled 2 hover tanks and eliminated an entire squad before disappearing into what the humans call storm drains. When we attempted to pursue, we discovered that the drainage system had been converted into a defensive network spanning the entire city." Kexboth activated her data pad, projecting a holographic display that showed a human city from above. "Admiral, please observe. This is what we initially identified as the human settlement designated Detroit. Our analysis indicated it was a partially abandoned urban area with limited strategic value. The projection zoomed in, revealing what appeared to be a normal cityscape with the expected patterns of Vorthan occupation. Guard posts, patrol routes, and secured facilities were clearly marked in green. Now observe what our reconnaissance revealed when we began experiencing resistance activities. The projection changed, and ZYXthera felt her primary heart skip a beat. The same city was now revealed to be a vast three-dimensional fortress. Buildings were connected by hidden tunnels, rooftops had been converted into sniper nests and observation posts, and what had appeared to be abandoned structures were actually elaborate camouflaged defensive positions. They turned an entire city into a weapon, she whispered. Not just one city, Admiral, Trazek replied grimly. Every human settlement we've examined shows similar modifications. They're not fighting to defend their cities, they've transformed their cities into machines for fighting us. The implications hit ZYXthera like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just refused to surrender, they had used the 3 days since the invasion to completely reorganize their civilization around the concept of resistance. In less time than it took most species to process the shock of defeat, humanity had apparently transformed itself into something unprecedented. What are our current casualties? She asked, though she dreaded the answer. 47% of ground forces, Trazek reported. And that number increases every hour. But, Admiral, the casualties themselves are not the primary concern. Explain. The humans are taking prisoners, he said, and his voice carried a note of genuine terror. They're capturing our soldiers alive and, then. He paused, struggling with the translation. They're convincing them to switch sides. The conference room fell silent except for the humming of the ship's systems. ZYXthera stared at her ground commander, certain she had misheard. Repeat that. The humans have developed what they call deprogramming techniques. They capture our soldiers, treat their injuries, provide food and shelter, and then engage in extended conversations about the nature of freedom, individual choice, and personal autonomy. Trazek's antennae were twitching rapidly. Admiral, 17 of our soldiers have formally requested asylum with the human resistance. They refuse to return to duty and actively provide intelligence to human forces. Impossible, Veltar clicked frantically. Vorthan loyalty conditioning cannot be broken by mere conversation. That's what we believed, Kexvoth agreed. But, the humans aren't trying to break our conditioning. They're introducing concepts that our conditioning never anticipated having to resist. They speak of something they call moral choice and the right of individuals to determine their own actions based on personal conscience rather than received authority. ZYXthera felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Are you telling me that humans are converting Vorthan soldiers through philosophical discussion? Worse than that, Admiral, Trazek continued. The converted soldiers are now working with human resistance cells to develop more effective methods for fighting Vorthan forces. They're sharing intelligence about our tactics, weaknesses, and operational procedures. In effect, we're teaching the humans how to defeat us by providing them with willing instructors who used to be our own people. The tactical display activated without being requested, showing a real-time update from the planetary surface. ZYXthera watched in growing horror as the map revealed the true scope of what they were facing. What had initially appeared to be scattered resistance activities now revealed itself as a coordinated network of operations spanning the entire planet. Show me the resistance structure, she commanded. The display shifted, attempting to map the human resistance organization. Instead of the hierarchical command structure that would be expected from any military force, what appeared on the screen looked more like a biological organism. Cells of activity connected to other cells, sharing resources and information, adapting and growing in response to Vorthan actions. We cannot identify their command structure, Kexvoth reported. There appears to be no central authority, no hierarchy of command, no single point of failure that we can target. Each resistance cell operates independently while somehow maintaining coordination with the larger network. Every human is a potential resistance leader, Trazek added. We've attempted to identify and eliminate key figures, only to discover that their removal simply triggers the emergence of new leaders from what had appeared to be the general population. ZYXthera studied the display, trying to understand how such a system could possibly function. In her experience, coordination required command structure, and command structure created vulnerabilities that could be exploited. But, the humans seemed to have created something that maintained coordination without centralized control. How is this possible? She asked. We believe it has to do with their concept of shared values, Kexvoth replied, consulting her datapad. Rather than following specific orders from specific leaders, they appear to operate according to principles that every individual understands and accepts. This allows them to coordinate actions without requiring direct communication or central planning. What principles? Freedom, as they discussed in their initial communication, Veltar answered. But also concepts they term human dignity, individual rights, and collective defense. Each human appears to understand instinctively how to act in support of these principles, even when operating in complete isolation from other resistance members. The display updated again, showing recent resistance activities. ZYXthera watched as the data revealed a pattern that made her compound eyes widen in recognition. The humans weren't just fighting randomly, they were systematically studying Vorthan forces and developing increasingly sophisticated countermeasures. They're learning, she said. Faster than we believed possible, Trezek confirmed. Every engagement teaches them something new about our capabilities and limitations. They share this information instantly across their network, which means that a tactical innovation discovered in one location is immediately available to resistance cells anywhere on the planet. Moreover, Kexvoth added, they're not just learning about our military capabilities. They're studying our psychology, our social structures, our decision-making processes. The conversations they have with captured soldiers aren't just about conversion, they're intelligence-gathering operations designed to understand how Vorthan society functions. ZYXthera felt a growing sense of unease as the implications became clear. They're preparing for a larger conflict. Admiral, a new voice interrupted from the communication station. Lieutenant KYXera was the youngest member of the bridge crew, recently graduated from the Imperial Academy. Her voice carried the uncertainty of inexperience as she reported, we're receiving a communication from the human delegation. They're requesting another meeting. Tell them we do not negotiate with terrorists, Veltar clicked automatically. Sir, KYXera continued nervously, they say it's not a negotiation. They say they're delivering an update on the current situation and extending what they call one final courtesy. ZYXthera considered the request. Every instinct told her to refuse, to maintain the dignity of Vorthan authority. But another part of her, the part that had kept her alive through centuries of warfare, whispered that she needed to understand what she was truly facing. Send them up, she decided. The same 5 humans who had visited 3 days ago returned to the bridge, but something fundamental had changed. Where before they had carried themselves with the grim determination of the defeated attempting to negotiate mercy, now they moved with the quiet confidence of individuals who had already won. General Chen stepped forward as before, but this time his bearing reminded ZYXthera uncomfortably of her own demeanor when accepting the surrender of defeated enemies. Admiral, he began, thank you for agreeing to see us. Speak quickly, she replied. My patience for human games has ended. No games, Chen assured her. We're here to deliver information and extend a final opportunity. What information? You've been studying our resistance activities for 3 days, Chen said. We've been studying your response to those activities. We thought you should know what we've learned. Colonel Martinez stepped forward, carrying what appeared to be a standard human data device. Admiral, we've observed your tactical responses, analyzed your decision-making patterns, and evaluated your strategic capabilities. Would you like to know our assessment? ZYXthera found herself nodding despite her better judgment. You're very good at fighting wars, Martinez continued. Your tactics are sound, your equipment is superior, and your soldiers are well trained. But you've never fought an enemy that treated the war itself as a learning experience. What do you mean? Every action you've taken has taught us something about your capabilities and limitations, the elderly human explained. Every patrol you've sent out has revealed something about your operational procedures. Every response to our attacks has shown us how your command structure makes decisions. In 3 days, the younger female added, we've developed a comprehensive understanding of Vorthan military doctrine, technological capabilities, and strategic thinking. More importantly, we've identified the fundamental assumptions that underlie your entire approach to warfare. Chen reached into his jacket and withdrew a small device that ZYXthera didn't recognize. Admiral, this contains our complete analysis of Vorthan military capabilities, along with detailed countermeasures for every weapon system, tactical doctrine, and strategic approach your forces have employed. He placed the device on the deck between them. We're giving this to you as a courtesy, because we want you to understand the choice you're facing. What choice? You can take this information back to your superiors and explain that humanity cannot be conquered by traditional military means, Chen said. You can withdraw your forces, leave our system, and spread the word that humans are too dangerous to attack. Or. He paused, and, when he continued, his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. You can stay and discover what happens when a species that refuses to surrender decides to stop playing defense. The bridge fell silent as the implications of his words settled over the Vorthan crew. ZYX stared at the device lying on her deck, understanding instinctively that it represented something far more dangerous than any weapon. What are you saying? We're saying that for 3 days, we've been learning how to fight you, Martinez replied. But, Admiral, we've also been learning how to find you. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Admiral ZYX felt something cold crawl up her spine as their meaning became clear. She stared at General Chen, searching his expression for any sign that this was some kind of bluff or psychological warfare tactic. What she saw instead was the calm certainty of someone stating a simple fact. Explain, she commanded, though part of her already dreaded the answer. The youngest member of the human delegation, the female she had barely noticed before, stepped forward. Admiral, allow me to introduce myself properly. Dr. Elena Vasquez, former astrophysicist at the European Space Agency. My specialty was deep space navigation and stellar cartography. She smiled with the kind of expression that predators wore when cornering prey. 3 days ago, I was a civilian scientist. Today, I'm the head of the Human Space Intelligence Division. Impossible, Commander Veltar clicked frantically. Humans lack the technology for deep space reconnaissance. Your species has barely achieved basic faster-than-light travel. You're absolutely correct, Dr. Vasquez agreed. We didn't have that technology 3 days ago. But, Admiral, you've spent 72 hours demonstrating it for us. She gestured toward the main display, and somehow the human device she carried interfaced seamlessly with Vorthan systems, projecting a three-dimensional map of local space. ZYX's compound eyes widened as she recognized not just her own fleet positions, but detailed schematics of Vorthan ship designs, patrol routes, and communication protocols. Every message your fleet has sent, every scan you've conducted, every probe you've launched has been monitored, analyzed, and reverse-engineered, Dr. Vasquez continued. We've mapped your entire technological infrastructure simply by watching you use it. Colonel Martinez added, we learned something interesting about Vorthan psychology from our conversations with captured soldiers. Your species has a fundamental assumption that technological superiority equals inherent superiority. You believe that because your tools are better, your thinking must be superior as well. It is, Major Kexvoth interjected, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. Is it? Chen asked quietly. Major, how long did it take your species to develop faster-than-light travel? 3,000 years of technological development, Kexvoth replied proudly. We achieved it in 73, the elderly human said simply. Not 7,300. 73 actual years, from the first powered flight to breaking the light barrier. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. The difference isn't that you're smarter than us, Major. The difference is that you're more careful than us. What is your point? ZYX demanded, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew. Our point, Dr. Vasquez replied, is that Vorthans approach problems methodically, thoroughly, and safely. You test every possibility, consider every consequence, and implement solutions only after extensive analysis. It's an excellent approach for building a stable civilization. However, Chen continued, it's a terrible approach for dealing with humans. Because while you've been carefully analyzing the situation and developing measured responses, we've been improvising, adapting, and trying things that any rational species would consider impossibly dangerous. The display shifted, showing what appeared to be a Vorthan communication intercept. ZYX recognized it as a routine status report from one of her patrol vessels, but somehow the humans were not only receiving it, they were decoding it in real time. How, she whispered. Your communication protocols are actually quite sophisticated, Dr. Vasquez explained. Quantum encrypted, multi-frequency, with excellent security features. It would take our best computers several centuries to crack them using conventional methods. So we didn't use conventional methods, the elderly human added with what ZYX was learning to recognize as human satisfaction. We asked one of your converted soldiers to explain how the system worked, then, we sent a friendly message to one of your communication satellites. A friendly message?
Commander Veltar's translator was struggling with the concept.
We identified ourselves as humans, explained that we were curious about how your communication system functioned, and asked if the satellite's artificial intelligence would be willing to help us understand it better, Martinez said. Apparently, Vorthan AIs are programmed to be educational when approached politely.
The bridge fell silent except for the humming of ship systems as the implications sank in.
ZYX stared at the humans, trying to process what she was hearing. You obtained access to our secure communications by asking nicely? Your security protocols are designed to prevent hostile intrusion, Chen explained. They're not designed to handle curious neighbors who introduce themselves politely and express genuine interest in learning.
Your AI systems interpreted our inquiries as legitimate educational requests. This is insane, Kexvoth clicked rapidly.
No species would attempt such an approach.
It has no logical foundation.
Exactly, Dr. Vasquez replied cheerfully. That's why it worked. Your entire security framework is built around the assumption that potential enemies will behave logically and predictably. You've never encountered a species that treats first contact as an opportunity for collaborative learning rather than conquest. The display updated again, and ZYX felt her worst fears confirmed as she saw detailed intelligence reports on Vorthan fleet positions throughout the sector. Not just her own task force, but ships stationed in systems dozens of light-years away. You've mapped our entire regional fleet structure, she said, her voice barely above a whisper.
Regional? Chen asked with raised eyebrows. Admiral, we've identified the locations of every major Vorthan military installation within 50 light-years of Earth.
Your communication networks are quite chatty once you know how to listen.
Moreover, the elderly human continued, we've been analyzing the pattern of your expansion into this region.
We understand your strategic objectives, your resource requirements, and your operational timelines. You're planning to invade the Empire, Veltar accused. No, Martinez replied simply. We're planning to make sure you never threaten another species the way you've threatened us. The weight of that statement settled over the bridge like a physical presence. ZYX found herself staring at 5 humans who had somehow transformed from defeated supplicants into something far more dangerous than any enemy she had ever faced.
What do you want? She asked. We want you to understand what you've created, Chen replied.
3 days ago, humanity was a single-world species with no knowledge of galactic politics, no understanding of interstellar warfare, and no enemies beyond our own planet.
Today, Dr.
Vasquez continued, we're a species that has been introduced to the concept that aggressive civilizations exist in our galaxy, that peaceful coexistence may not be possible, and that our survival depends on our ability to defend ourselves against threats we never imagined. You've given us teachers, the elderly human added, gesturing toward the device Chen had placed on the deck. 17 Vorthan soldiers who are eager to share everything they know about galactic civilization, military technology, and the location of species that might need our protection.
And you've given us motivation, Martinez concluded.
Because now we know that somewhere out there are other species facing the same choice we faced, surrender or fight. And we've learned that we're very, very good at fighting. ZYX felt the universe shifting around her as she began to understand the magnitude of what had occurred.
The Vorthans hadn't just failed to conquer humanity, they had accidentally created something unprecedented in galactic history.
You're talking about becoming an interventionist power, she said. We're talking about making sure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else, Chen corrected. Admiral, you've introduced us to a galaxy where the strong prey on the weak as a matter of course. Where entire civilizations live in fear of species like yours. Where peaceful development is impossible because aggressive powers will always eventually come calling.
That is the natural order, Kexvoth declared. Not anymore, Dr. Vasquez replied. Because now there's humanity.
And we have some very different ideas about how galactic civilization should function. The tactical display chimed with another priority alert, and ZYX realized with growing dread that she was watching the birth of something entirely new in galactic history. The humans weren't just planning to defend themselves, they were planning to fundamentally alter the balance of power that had governed interstellar relations for millennia.
This is your final warning, Admiral, Chen said quietly.
Withdraw your forces, return to Vorthan space, and explain to your superiors that humanity is not available for conquest.
Do that, and this ends here.
We'll develop our own defenses, explore our own region of space, and leave you alone.
And if we refuse?
The 5 humans exchanged glances, and, when Chen answered, his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Then, you'll discover what happens when the most adaptable, creative, and stubborn species in the galaxy decides that the current galactic order is unacceptable and needs to be changed. ZYX stared at the humans, understanding that she was witnessing a moment that would reshape the galaxy. In trying to add one more conquest to the Vorthan Empire, they had accidentally awakened something that would challenge everything the established powers believed about strength, civilization, and the nature of warfare itself. "We need time to consider," she said finally. Of course, Chen agreed. "You have 6 hours. After that, we assume you've chosen to stay, and we'll begin implementing what we call Plan B. What is Plan B?" The humans smiled with expressions that sent chills through every Vorthan on the bridge. Plan B is when we stop being defensive and start being curious about what other Vorthan-occupied worlds might be interested in learning about freedom. 5 hours and 37 minutes after the human delegation departed, Admiral ZYX stood alone in her command chamber, staring at the small device they had left behind. She had not touched it, had not analyzed it, had not even scanned it. Somehow, she knew that the moment she acknowledged its contents, she would be admitting that everything she believed about warfare, about power, about the natural order of the galaxy, was wrong. The device sat on her desk like an accusation, its simple human design mocking the sophisticated technology that surrounded it. How had a species that had achieved spaceflight less than a century ago managed to create something that terrified her more than any weapon she had ever faced? A soft chime announced an incoming communication, and Commander Veltar's voice carried through the ship's internal system with barely controlled panic. "Admiral, you need to see this. The humans, they're broadcasting something. To everyone." ZYX activated her command display and felt her primary heart stop beating. The main screen showed a transmission originating from Earth, but it wasn't being sent to Vorthan forces. It was being broadcast on open channels to every inhabited system within 50 light-years, in hundreds of languages, using communication protocols that should have been impossible for humans to access. The face that appeared on screen was General Chen, but he was no longer addressing Vorthan military commanders. He was speaking directly to the citizens of the galaxy. "People of the stars," his voice carried through the universal translator with perfect clarity. "My name is Marcus Chen, and I represent the human species of Earth. 3 days ago, our world was invaded by forces of the Vorthan Empire. We were told that resistance was futile, that our civilization would be absorbed, and that our people would serve new masters." The image shifted to show scenes of Earth during the invasion, Vorthan ships hovering over human cities, occupation forces establishing control points, the apparent complete defeat of human military forces. "They were wrong," Chen continued, and now the image showed something else entirely. Human resistance fighters emerging from hiding, improvised weapons being constructed in ordinary kitchens, children carrying messages through tunnel systems, elderly humans teaching combat tactics to their neighbors. They were wrong because they misunderstood something fundamental about the nature of freedom. They believed that freedom was a luxury that could be taken away when survival was at stake. They discovered that for humans, freedom is survival. ZYX watched in growing horror as the transmission revealed the scope of human resistance operations. Not just the individual acts of defiance she had been receiving in military reports, but a coordinated transformation of an entire civilization into something unprecedented. "We are sharing this message," Chen said, "because we have learned that we are not alone. In our conversations with Vorthan soldiers, we have discovered that across the galaxy, there are species living under the threat of conquest, planets that have been absorbed into empires they never chose to join, and entire civilizations that exist only at the sufferance of stronger neighbors." The transmission shifted again, and Dr. Vasquez appeared on screen, standing before what appeared to be a sophisticated technical facility that definitely had not existed on Earth 3 days ago. "My name is Elena Vasquez," she said, "and I want to share some information with anyone who might be listening. The technology that spacefaring civilizations use to maintain control over their territories has a weakness that no one talks about. It assumes that resistance requires technological parity. It assumes that freedom can only be defended by those who possess equivalent weapons and ships and shields." She gestured to equipment behind her that ZYX recognized with growing alarm as clearly Vorthan in origin, but modified in ways that hurt to look at. "This assumption is incorrect," Dr. Vasquez continued. "Freedom doesn't require technological parity. Freedom requires something much simpler: the absolute refusal to accept that domination is inevitable. And that refusal, combined with human creativity, can accomplish things that the galaxy's military experts would consider impossible."
The screen split, showing multiple human faces from what appeared to be different locations across Earth. Young and old, male and female, representing every human ethnicity ZYXthera could identify. When they spoke, it was with one voice. To any species that is listening, we offer you this knowledge: you are not powerless. Your oppressors are not invincible. The galaxy's military powers depend on your acceptance of their superiority, but that acceptance is a choice. And choices can be changed. Colonel Martinez appeared next, standing in what looked like a classroom filled with beings that ZYXthera realized with shock were the converted Vorthan soldiers. "We are establishing what we call the Freedom Coalition," Martinez announced. "Any species, any world, any group of individuals who refuse to accept domination by aggressive powers can contact us. We will share what we have learned about resistance, about asymmetric warfare, about turning oppression into opportunity. More importantly," she continued, "we will share what we have learned about hope. Because the galaxy's empires depend on the belief that resistance is futile. When that belief dies, their power dies with it." The transmission returned to General Chen, but now the background showed something that made ZYXthera's mandibles click in pure terror. Behind him, clearly visible through large viewports, were ships. Not human ships, which would have been concerning enough, but recognizable designs from a dozen different species, all bearing markings that indicated they were no longer operating under their original government's authority. "In the past 72 hours, Chen said, we have been contacted by rebel groups, resistance movements, and freedom fighters from 17 different worlds. They have shared their stories, their resources, and their determination to live free. In return, we have shared our techniques, our philosophy, and our commitment to mutual defense." He paused, and, when he continued, his words carried the weight of history being made. "The age of uncontested imperial expansion is over. Today, we announce the formation of the Galactic Freedom Coalition, dedicated to the simple principle that no species has the right to dominate another. To the galaxy's empires, we say this: your expansion stops here. Your oppression ends now. Your assumption that the weak will always submit to the strong has been proven false." The transmission switched to a wide view that showed the scope of what humanity had accomplished in less than 4 days. The orbital space around Earth was filled with ships, space stations, and defensive platforms that represented technology from across the galaxy, all somehow integrated into a unified defense network. "To the Vorthan Empire specifically," Chen said, his voice hardening, "you have 6 minutes to begin withdrawal from our system. Fail to do so, and you will discover what happens when the galaxy's most adaptable species decides to export the concept of freedom to your occupied territories. To any species contemplating aggressive expansion," he continued, "understand this: humanity will respond to threats against any coalition member as if they were threats against Earth itself. The era of consequences-free conquest is over." The transmission ended, leaving ZYXthera staring at a blank screen as the implications crashed over her like a physical weight. In less than 4 days, humanity had not just resisted conquest, they had fundamentally altered the balance of galactic power. Her communication system erupted with incoming messages from across the sector. Panic reports from Vorthan installations describing sudden uprising among subjugated populations. Emergency requests for reinforcements from governors whose previously pacified territories had exploded into revolt. Most disturbing of all, carefully worded communications from Vorthan colonies asking for clarification of Empire policy regarding individual freedoms. The humans had done something that no military strategist had ever considered possible: they had turned the Vorthan Empire's size and scope against itself by providing a framework that allowed every oppressed group to coordinate resistance simultaneously. Commander Veltar's voice interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority communication from the Imperial High Command." The face that appeared on her screen was Grand Admiral Zefkara, the supreme commander of all Vorthan military forces. Her expression carried the kind of cold fury that usually preceded the obliteration of entire star systems. "Admiral ZYXthera," the Grand Admiral's voice was like ice breaking under pressure, "explain to me how a minor conquest operation against a primitive species has resulted in rebellion across 7 sectors of the Empire." ZYXthera found herself struggling to find words that could possibly convey what she had witnessed. "Grand Admiral, the humans, they are not what we believe them to be. They are insects." Zefkara's mandibles clicked violently. "Primitives with crude technology and no understanding of galactic realities." "No, Grand Admiral," ZYXthera replied quietly. "They are something we have never encountered before.
They are a species that treats the concept of freedom as a fundamental law of nature, and they are willing to die rather than compromise that principle. Then, they will die, the Grand Admiral declared. I am dispatching the first Imperial fleet. This rebellion will be crushed, these humans will be exterminated, and the natural order will be restored. ZYXthera felt something cold settle in her chest as she realized what was about to happen. Grand Admiral, I respectfully request that you reconsider. The humans have demonstrated capabilities that suggest a full military confrontation would be. Would be what, Admiral? For a moment, ZYXthera hesitated. Then, she picked up the device the humans had left and activated it. The data that flooded her display was comprehensive, detailed, and absolutely terrifying. Not just intelligence about Vorthan capabilities, but complete strategic analyses of the Empire's weaknesses, detailed plans for coordinated resistance operations, and, most impossibly of all, what appeared to be precise locations and tactical assessments of every major Vorthan military installation in the galaxy. Would be the end of the Empire as we know it, she whispered. The Grand Admiral's expression shifted from fury to confusion. Explain. Grand Admiral, in 4 days, these humans have created a network that spans our entire territory. They have converted our own soldiers into willing teachers, turned our communication systems into intelligence-gathering tools, and established contact with every resistance movement in Vorthan space. She paused, staring at the data scrolling past her eyes. They know everything about us, and they have shared that knowledge with everyone we have ever oppressed. Impossible. I thought so too, ZYXthera agreed. But, Grand Admiral, they are not fighting us the way we fight wars. They are fighting us the way viruses fight immune systems. They adapt faster than we can respond, they spread through vectors we don't know how to close, and they turn our own strength against us. The display chimed softly, indicating an incoming transmission. When ZYXthera accepted it, General Chan's face appeared alongside the Grand Admiral's, somehow having accessed their secure military communication channel. Grand Admiral, Chen said politely, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. We felt it was important to include you in this conversation. Zethkara's mandibles clicked in pure rage. Human, you dare to violate Imperial command protocols? We're not violating anything, Chen replied reasonably. We're participating in a discussion about the future of galactic civilization. And, frankly, that future depends on decisions you're about to make. I will crush your pathetic species like the insects you are. You could try, Shin agreed. But, Grand Admiral, I think you should understand what that would mean. Destroying humanity would require a military operation that would involve most of your fleet. During that operation, every oppressed population in your empire would be rising in coordinated rebellion, guided by intelligence we've already shared and tactics we've already taught them. Dr. Vasquez appeared beside Chen on the screen. Moreover, Grand Admiral, we've identified the locations of your major shipyards, supply depots, and command centers. This information has been shared with resistance cells throughout your territory. You're saying you would use a war against humanity to destroy the Empire from within, ZYXthera said, finally, understanding the scope of what she was facing. We're saying that attacking humanity would be the last mistake the Vorthan Empire ever made, Shen replied. But, it doesn't have to come to that. You have another option. What option? Withdrawal, Shen said simply. Pull your forces back to your core territories. Release the worlds you've conquered. Allow your subject species to determine their own futures. In return, the coalition will respect Vorthan sovereignty within your traditional borders. Never, Zethkara snarled. Then, I guess we'll see what happens when an empire that rules through fear discovers what it's like to be afraid, Shen replied sadly. Grand Admiral, you have 1 hour to begin withdrawal from all contested territories. After that, humanity stops being diplomatic and starts being creative. The transmission ended, leaving the 2 Vorthan admirals staring at a blank screen. Zethkara's voice was barely controlled as she spoke. Admiral ZYXthera, what is your tactical assessment? ZYXthera looked at the device still displaying human intelligence about Vorthan capabilities, thought about the converted soldiers now teaching resistance tactics to former slaves, and considered the reports flooding in from across the Empire. Grand Admiral, she said quietly, I believe I now understand what war actually is. And, I believe we are about to lose one. In the end, the choice was simple. 6 months later, what had once been the Vorthan Empire was a confederation of independent worlds linked by trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. The Vorthons themselves had discovered, to their surprise, that ruling through consent rather than conquest was not only possible, but actually more prosperous than their previous approach.
Humanity had kept their word about respecting Vorthon sovereignty. They had also kept their word about everything else. Across the galaxy, the Age of Empires was ending.
In its place, something unprecedented was beginning, a civilization based on the radical idea that freedom was not a privilege to be granted, but a right to be defended.
And, at the center of it all, on a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable star, humans continued to do what they had always done: adapt, learn, and refuse to accept that anything was impossible.
Admiral Zyxthera, now serving as the Vorthon representative to the Galactic Freedom Coalition, often found herself reflecting on the moment everything changed. She had believed she understood war, had thought she comprehended the nature of power and conquest. She had been wrong about everything except one thing: freedom, once tasted, was indeed impossible to forget.